Hi everyone. I'm doing the third part of today's session. My name is Kirsty Ferguson and I'm a research associate in Philip Lang's group at BC Children's Hospital Research Institute. As we've already heard today, knowledge dissemination takes many forms, and more creative methods are needed to make sure that research is accessible to a wider audience and expand its impact. And in the Lang Lab, we're using various ways to share our research on finding personalised treatments for children with cancer. From podcasts to media broadcasts, we wrote a magazine article for high school students and starting to use art and illustrations. And if you're interested, I'm going to be doing an Access Presents seminar later in April on our work. However, today I'm going to talk about something a bit different, which is my journey into using creative writing and poetry as a powerful arts-based knowledge dissemination and exchange method. And I hope this will inspire you to start sharing your research in creative ways and maybe even give poetry a try. So I'd like to start by reading one of my favourite poems, which is by Wendy Cope, called The Orange. At lunchtime, I bought a huge orange. The size of it made us all laugh. I peeled it and shared it with Robert and Dave. They got quarters and I had a half. And that orange, it made me so happy, as ordinary things often do just lately. The shopping, a walk in the park. This is peace and contentment. It's new. The rest of the day was quite easy. I did all of the jobs on my list and enjoyed them and had some time over. I love you and glad I exist. To me, this demonstrates the power of poetry to concisely communicate a feeling or an idea that's hard to articulate, and also encourages us to observe our surroundings and take notice of the little things. And I think it's this that lends itself so well to knowledge dissemination. But you might still be wondering, how does poetry and research fit together? And like many things, this is easier for me to explain in hindsight. So I grew up near London in England. Just before I was 13, I was diagnosed with a brain condition and underwent neurosurgery. And as this often happens, it shaped my interest in studying science in high school. I then went to university to study biochemistry, where I became interested in cancer biology and stem cells. And I moved up to Edinburgh to do a PhD, where I worked on understanding cancer stem cells in an aggressive adult brain cancer called glioblastoma. And throughout my PhD, I always knew the importance of being able to communicate research. However, I'll be honest, presentations filled me with fear, and the knack of grabbing an audience's attention remained a bit of a mystery to me. Fast forward to 2020 and the COVID-19 lockdowns, and I found myself in a fourth floor apartment in Edinburgh, having just submitted my PhD thesis. And like a lot of people, I had to find ways of coping with the new isolation that we all found ourselves in. And I enrolled in a multi-faith course by the chaplaincy at Edinburgh University called the Abundant Academy. And this was set up to help students and staff top up their strength and build a community. And at the start of each session, a poem was read. And I started to write these down. And when I made the time to stop and listen, I found that they would often resonate with me. And during this time, I would go on my daily lockdown walks in the mornings when it was very quiet, empty of people, but I found that it was full of other things. And I started to observe my surroundings more. And I often took photos and started to craft a little poem to go with each one. A good friend of mine then gifted me a book called The Poetry Pharmacy, which I'd recommend to anyone who would like to start reading poetry. And this is an anthology where each poem is prescribed for a life condition. And in the words of the author, poetry has been a companion to me when my heart was at its lightest, and a comfort to me when it felt too heavy to carry another step. To find the right poem at a crucial moment, one capable of expressing our situation with considerably more elegance than we can ourselves, is to discover a powerful sense of complicity and that precious realization I'm not the only one who feels this. the right poem can help me make sense of life. And it was this comfort that drew me to reading poetry more and more. The mindfulness chaplain at Edinburgh University had the advice to store up words like a quiet library of comfort and pass them on to others. And this spurred me on to try writing poetry myself, and my family run a mental health charity in the UK, and I began sharing poems on their signposting resources, which they distribute freely to schools and universities. So this was my journey into poetry initially. I then, once out of the lockdowns, I moved down to Cambridge to do a postdoc where I worked on finding differentiation therapies for the childhood cancer neuroblastoma. And alongside my research, I applied to be part of Cambridge Creative Encounters, which was a programme for the Cambridge Festival, which was challenging researchers to work with creative professionals and rethink the way that they're communicating their research. And this is when science and poetry really came together for me. And I wrote this collection of poems, part of a whole collection from the festival, but also a smaller collection from me called You, Me and Us, which aimed to give the public an insight into life as a researcher and also encourage scientists to take a step back and see their work from a different perspective. And I realised how much science and poetry have in common. For me, taking a step back to stop and observe is the foundation for both. And writing poetry helped me to see research through a different lens, and it gave me a tool to communicate different perspectives which often feel disconnected when you're working in the lab. For example, I found poetry could be a great way to share our research with those who are affected by the diseases we're working on. And in my postdoc, I was working on finding ways of redirecting neuroblastoma cells to stop dividing and go back down their correct developmental path to become neurons, with the intention that this could be a less harmful treatment for children. Specifically, we were looking at combining cell cycle inhibitors with retinoic acid, which is already used as a maintenance therapy for children with high-risk neuroblastoma. And I wrote this poem, Kindness, aimed at communicating this concept to children and families. I also presented the same work as a 1-minute poem at an international neuroblastoma conference. And even though I think I had a few strange looks to start with, I was awarded the first prize. And this really showed me that poetry, that research can be presented in creative ways, and importantly, in a way that felt authentic to me. As part of Creative Encounters, I also wanted to represent the voices of people with lived experience of neuroblastoma. So I read many personal stories shared by patients and families from Neuroblastoma UK, and using a technique called found poetry. These words inspired a poem I wrote called Fly High. And this message, Fly High, is words from Beth's story, and it speaks to children who are now angels, those who have survived neuroblastoma and fly high despite treatment side effects, and families who continue to navigate this path alongside their children. So I will read this one. Fly High. None of us had heard the word neuroblastoma until that frightful day. Just 18 months old, tumour size of a fist, with 10% chance of surviving, they say. Then chemotherapy, surgery, a stem cell transplant. We were so proud of her fighting spirit. Radio differentiation, immunotherapy, and he never complained one bit. This cancer, it was relentless. What would we fight it with now? There's a lasting impact when a child has cancer, but we continue through somehow. My little angel slipped away that morning as I whispered, I love you, fly high. Now up above, with wings they spread, sparkles of hope in the deep blue sky. See, everyone needs a bit of hope, even just a tiny glimmer. You never know the journey life will take you on. Remember to look for the things that shimmer. Put your heart and soul in what you want to achieve. Don't let cancer hold you back. I truly wish you a future you deserve. Fly high and never look back. And thank you to Neuroblastoma UK and all those who allowed me to share their words through this poem. namely Georgia's dad Richard, Syra, Becky, Charlotte, Lauren, and Beth's mum Jill. Neuroblastoma UK and some of the people with lived experience whose words were in this poem then visited us for a day in the lab. And for many of the researchers, this was their first time meeting someone affected by the disease that they were working on. And for the people with lived experience, it opened up a new understanding of neuroblastoma. And this showed me that poetry can open up dialogue between researchers, charities, and patients. And to build on this, I was awarded a fund from my institute to do a collaborative neuroblastoma poetry project. So over 2 months, a group of 13 people with different relationships to neuroblastoma, from parents to clinicians to charity workers and researchers, we met fortnightly online for poetry workshops. And these were supported by Greg and Agnes, who are the public engagement managers at the Cambridge Stem Cell Institute, and facilitated by myself and Reverend Phil Sharkey, who is chaplain at the Addenbrooke's Hospital in Cambridge, who I met at a wellbeing event, and we connected over our shared love of poetry. And over 5 workshops, we used creative writing to reflect on and respond to our thoughts and feelings, wrote based on prompts, including fill-in-the-blank poems from The Magic Words by a poet called Joseph Fasano, which makes poetry accessible to everybody. And we wrote group poetry. And most of the people in these workshops had never written any poetry before, so it created a shared experience for everyone to build trust and share their experiences. So at the end of the project, we wrote a group poem called Hope in Time, which inspired the title of our anthology. And we had a meetup in person, and our anthology was printed and shared by Solving Kids Cancer UK at their Parents Symposium last March. So this project showed me that, as well as amplifying individual voices, poetry could be a unique way to form a collective voice. And at my Institute summer retreat, I then used this and asked colleagues to share words and phrases based on the prompt, what does Stem Cell Institute mean? The Stem Cell Institute mean to you, and what is stem cell research? And then I then used these to form the Institute poem called A Place of Possibility. And this summarised, in the words of the people who study and work there, the research culture, and the title was used to inspire the Institute's new promotional video, A Place of Possibility. So in summary, I think poetry is a powerful tool to share our research with various audiences. Writing poetry is a way to exchange knowledge, build connections, and amplify both individual and collective voices. And importantly, knowledge dissemination can take unconventional and creative forms, and I encourage everyone to find a creative method which you find is authentic to you. And just quickly, I'd like to say thank you to everyone who supported these projects and shared their words and experiences and time, and everyone who supported, including my PI, Anna Philpott, who supported me in doing this work during my postdoc, David Kane, who ran the poetry part of Cambridge Creative Encounters, of course, Phil, Greg and Agnes, who I already mentioned, and also Hayley Blackwell and Vicky Inglis at Solving Kids Cancer UK, who were extremely supportive and distributed the poetry to the parent community. So I'd now like to have an activity to bring some poetry to ACCESS. Later in the year, I'm hoping that we will launch a project for the ACCESS network inviting individual poets and some topics. So keep an eye out for that. But for today, we have a shorter activity. Patricia is handing out little bits of paper, and if you need a pencil, just shout. And for those of you online virtually, you should have a Google form where you can contribute to this activity. So I'd like everyone to write down a poetic line, a phrase, a word, or several words based on the prompts. What does ACCESS mean to you? What do you want to tell the world about ACCESS? Why do we need ACCESS? And how do you feel about being part of the ACCESS network? And your words will then be used to inspire an ACCESS-matic poet. It's all anonymous. Trisha will then come around with a box, so you just need to put your piece of paper in. And if you feel too rushed, we will put the box by the registration desk. So if you need a bit more time, feel free.
There's a pencil box circulating. If you need a pencil, you grab one. If you aren't going to partake, I won't tell Kirsty. But so can also use this time to ask any burning questions of any of the presenters. So feel free. Yes. Any last questions in the last 5 minutes?
Oh, yeah. So I'm so impressed with what you're doing, and I'm very impressed with your talk at the CCRC. So I was really glad that you came here. I'm curious. He's not here to defend himself, but I'm curious about what on earth you see in Philip. Anything in BC now? Is this it? And how are you bringing this work to Philip's lab and BC? And are you continuing this kind of intersection there?
Yes. So I guess I've only been in Canada for a year in Philip's lab, but I have lots of plans. So I didn't talk a lot about our work in the lab, but as well as writing poetry, I did all the drawing, so I'm into illustrations as well. So I'm hoping to put together maybe a booklet or an animation to explain precision oncology and proteomics, using some of the initial work I presented at the CCRC to children and families. So that's the main project at the moment. And the poetry side, I'm hoping to bring that to ACCESS. And I mentioned the magic words by Joseph Fasano. So that's something that I'd like to bring to the wider ACCESS network, because these fill in the blank poems can be accessible to people of all ages. So children and siblings could also be involved in that.
Jason, I see your hand.
Yeah, so thanks very much for sharing your journey with us. I mean, it was really fascinating. You talked about some of it. It was interesting, some of the group activity around the creative work. Often people think about creative work being solitary, so I think that's one way to bring things about. So I'm going to ask you a bit of a controversial question, because I think everyone has creativity within them, but some people may be much more inhibited about that. And what are your thoughts about use of AI to help people with poetry or writing a screenplay or doing art, as being a tool to help people who say, well, there's no way I can write a poem? That might be an enabler. So I just wonder, and I say it's controversial because people might see that as a cheat or see that as a unfair advantage as opposed to them just doing it themselves. But I think for some people that would be an open a door for them that they might not feel comfortable with.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between using AI as a tool for communicating facts versus as using it to write a poem based on your experiences. I think a big part of the projects that I just presented is poetry as a expression tool. And for me, I don't think AI just never replaces that. It's a way of expressing your experiences and a way of connecting people. But maybe the first part that I showed, which is more communicating a scientific concept as a poem, it could be useful for that, for people who feel like writing is more of a barrier, or